Good evening and welcome to We the People, brought to you by the League of Women Voters of Minneapolis. My name is Joan Higginbotham and I'll be your host for this evening's program. In 2010, President Obama signed the Affordable Care Act, which is more commonly known as Obamacare. It promised that all American citizens would be covered by health care. And now we are seeing that it is being implemented slowly but surely, and a lot of people, including me, have a lot of questions about how it's going to be implemented. What's it going to mean for us, our families, our children? And tonight we have with us a guest who is going to help us to answer some of those questions. And at the end of the program, we'll have a couple of resources online that you can go to if you have more questions. So welcome our guest, Jean Abraham. Welcome, Jean.
Thank you.
Jean is a professor in the School of Public Health at the University of Minnesota and has a long experience in health policy. So you're the perfect person to have with us tonight.
Glad to be here.
Great. Well, the first question that we want to just sort of start out with is, what exactly is this Affordable Care Act?
So the Affordable Care Act is really a very important piece of legislation. It really tries to address two of the critical issues that we as in this country face, namely the issue of health insurance and the cost of health care. So in the United States, about 50 million individuals do not have health insurance, so they don't have that financial protection if they face a catastrophic event. And so the Affordable Care Act has some very important provisions to expand coverage and make coverage more affordable to the uninsured. The other issue that the Affordable Care Act really tries to address is cost control, and particularly how can we make the system more efficient? How can we produce higher value care for less cost?
And now in 2014, everybody will have to have health insurance. That means either they'll have to get it themselves or they'll have to get it through their employer?
Right, so there is an individual mandate as part of the Affordable Care Act, and the idea is that we want to make sure we get everybody into the risk pool. And so as of 2014, individuals will need to make sure that they have a qualified health plan, either purchased as an individual or obtained through their employer. Now there are some exceptions that are made for people for whom this is a significant financial hardship, or if they have religious objections. American Indians are exempt, so there are some exemptions. But basically in 2014, individuals will need to have this coverage or pay a penalty. And in 2014, the penalty will be phased in over time, but it will be somewhat significant. It's really meant to encourage people to purchase coverage.
Now, we said so everybody's going to get it one way or the other. But so say I'm an unemployed person and I just really don't have any resources. Then what do I do?
So within the Affordable Care Act, there's kind of two major coverage provisions. The first one is an expansion of the Medicaid program. So right now in many states, Medicaid is available to pregnant women, children, and certain groups, but generally not childless adults. And so the Medicaid expansion under the Affordable Care Act will expand eligibility up to 138% of the federal poverty line if states choose to do this expansion.
If states choose to do it.
Yeah, so that was one of the main decisions that the Supreme Court made. It actually caught a lot of people off guard, including many experts. We weren't expecting the Supreme Court to come down in allowing states to have that, to make that decision for whether they choose to expand or not. Now, what's really interesting, though, is that under the Affordable Care Act, the federal government is going to pay for most of the actual cost of expanding coverage to these newly eligible individuals, with states only bearing a small portion of that cost. But even that small portion for some states might be a lot.
So there have been, I know some governors have already said, we're out of it. We're not going to do that.
Yeah, so there was a lot of political posturing that went on right around the time of the Supreme Court decision. I think in the subsequent time period, there's been a lot of discussion going on about weighing the true pros and cons of not expanding eligibility, because these are millions of people who right now don't have insurance, who could could get coverage. And I think even more importantly, I think through this coverage expansion, that's going to really take some pressure off states in terms of uncompensated care, and particularly providers, hospitals and physicians
Right.
in those states who provide charity care.
So in other words, if we were in one of those states, as taxpayers should say, Governor, you better opt in because I don't want to have to pay for the emergency room.
Exactly. And again, it's going to be paid for predominantly by federal taxpayer dollars.
Which, of course, that would be our money too.
It would be our money too. That is true. So the Medicaid expansion is really there to fill in for the very low income individuals. But I think even more importantly, and even a larger proportion of the overall estimated number who are going to get coverage, that's going to come through the availability of subsidized private insurance in newly created exchanges.
Well, now this is what we've been hearing about in the news every day about the exchange. So what exactly is a health insurance exchange?
Yeah, so an exchange is an organized marketplace through which individuals and small employers will be able to shop for coverage. So right now, if you're an individual and you're trying to go out and buy insurance on your own, it can be very intimidating. You might have to go through a long set of paperwork. It can be very expensive, and it can just be hard to navigate. And what exchanges are going to do are create these organized marketplaces. So there's going to be an entity that's going to certify health plans. There's going to be a website through which people can comparison shop, and they're going to have really good information about the price and the quality of that coverage so they can make an informed decision. Now, what's particularly important, though, is that as part of the Affordable Care Act, there are subsidies available, premium assistance credits that will go to lower income individuals and families who don't have access to employer-sponsored insurance.
So in other words, if you're, say, a worker at McDonald's or something, you'll still have to get insurance in 2014. But chances are your income is low enough so that you'll get, if your employer may not offer health insurance, you could get it and get a subsidy from the federal government.
Exactly, and that subsidy is tied to a person's family income, and so the subsidy will be largest for those that are lowest income, and it will slide and phase out at 400% of poverty.
So everybody then will, A, they'll have to get health insurance, and B, they will be able to get health insurance.
Right, and there's important changes that are coming around how premiums will be set. In 2014, individuals will not be able to be denied coverage because of pre-existing health conditions, and there will be changes to the way in which premiums are set such that if you are older or sicker, you're going to be put in the same risk pool as younger and healthier people, and so that's going to even out, and so those premiums may be more affordable.
Now, I know that I've talked to some people who are small business people, and they're concerned that if everybody has to have health care, A, do they have to provide it, and B, how are they going to be able to afford it?
Right, so here in Minnesota, small employers are much less likely to offer health insurance as a part of workers' compensation. Only about 40% of employers with fewer than 50 workers offer coverage.
And I'm sure that they're saying, and if that changes, I'm going to go out of business, right?
That's right. Now, the important thing to remember is that I think policymakers did recognize that small employers are somewhat vulnerable to market conditions and are less likely, for a variety of reasons, not to offer insurance. So part of the provisions in the Affordable Care Act that try to encourage employers to offer, small employers are exempt from the penalties.
How is small?
So small is defined as having fewer than 50 full-time equivalent workers.
Okay.
And so what
They're
happens...
exempt.
Yeah. So in 2014, if you are a large employer, so if you have 50 or more workers, and you choose not to offer insurance, then you will have to pay a penalty. Penalty if any of your full-time workers go to the exchange and get subsidized coverage. And so employers are encouraged, larger employers are encouraged not to drop insurance as a result of that. But smaller employers are exempt from that penalty.
So let's just go over this again. If you have more than 50 employees, then you have to offer. You have to offer
insurance to your full-time workers.
Okay, so if some full-time worker goes to the exchange and says, my employer isn't offering me an option, then the employer will be penalized.
Right. So if a full-time worker at a large firm, doesn't have an offer of coverage, then they will have to go, and they go to the exchange and they get a subsidy, then that employer will have to pay a penalty.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, it's also the case that if you are a large employer that offers coverage but it's not affordable to your workers, then you may also have to pay a penalty.
Well, who determines affordability?
The IRS and the federal government creates the affordability standard for that, and it's based on the out-of-pocket premium, or the contribution toward the premium that the worker has to make.
Percentage of their income that it would...
as a function of the percentage of their income. So if that out-of-pocket premium requirement is high relative to their income, that is if it exceeds 9.5%, then that coverage is deemed to be not affordable, and they will be able to go to the exchange and qualify for subsidized coverage. Otherwise, workers won't be able to qualify for subsidies.
If the employer offers them insurance as part of their compensation package, that's the insurance they have to take?
They don't have to take it, but they won't get any subsidies in the exchange.
So what if it's really bad insurance?
So there are some criteria that are set out in the law that create a minimum actuarial value. So it has to basically be at least 60% actuarial value. So it's a minimum quality of coverage.
Now we've got the other group of employers who are 50 or less, 49 employers.
Small employers, yes.
And now they don't have to offer.
They do not have to offer health insurance to their workers. So but in thinking about the provisions of the law, one of the main motivations for the exchanges was to create a better functioning market for small employer groups. And so small employers can go to the exchange and will be able to shop for coverage for their workers if they choose to do so. They could do it outside or inside the exchange. It's also important to note that for small employers, particularly very small employers with lower wage workers, they can qualify for tax credits, premium tax credits. They are limited in duration to 2 years, but there is some additional help.
So in other words, if they offer insurance and it's sort of a cost to them, they can get some tax credits back from the government doing this.
They can for a couple years starting in 2014. And actually there is a program going on right now as well, but it will transition to the exchange in 2014.
So now the people who said to me, I'm going to go out of business if I have to do this, and they have like a Subway or something like that, that's probably not true. I mean, I think people are really scared, and we're trying to allay their fears tonight.
So I think one of the challenges is that the rules are pretty complex. They're complex in terms of thinking about how you even count workers, because you've got part-time and full-time workers, and who is counted and who's not counted, and thinking about those issues as it relates to even offering insurance or choosing not to. Really, for employers, big and small, there's really 3 things they have to weigh. They're weighing kind of the value of the penalty, kind of how much is that going to cost. They have to think about their workers and who in their workforce might gain from having subsidies if they were to not offer insurance. And then perhaps most importantly, they have to think about the fact that currently the employer-based insurance system has preferential tax treatment. So
for the
what employers contribute toward their workers' premiums are paid for with pre-tax dollars. So that's a value to the worker too. And that is there has a different treatment in exchanges relative to if employers actually offer it.
Now, how good a job is the government doing at explaining all this to people?
So I think they have been putting information out slowly. They have been issuing guidance, is the formal term, and rulemaking. It's still very complicated, and I think that a lot of work needs to be done to try to explain it and really put to rest some of the myths and try to make it easier and simplified for employers as they think about 2014, because it's coming very quickly.
It is coming very quickly. Well, and I guess I did go online and look at the exchange, and I think I'm a relatively sophisticated consumer, but boy, you really are still going to have to. I mean, if you're not very tech savvy, they must have some non-technical way of doing it.
So part of the infrastructure will include having navigators and a role for insurance brokers. So many small employers, for example, use brokers to help them shop for insurance or other types of fringe benefits, kind of coordinate those benefits. And so brokers will still have a role.
They'll have a bigger role,
in the
really,
exchange.
wouldn't they?
They will, but what's nice is that with the website and the development of the kind of infrastructure, people will still be able to shop a little bit in a way that's it's improved from what it is today.
Now, I wasn't exactly sure of whether the exchange was a marketplace or just a place where you could look and see and compare, or you could actually buy.
So I think until we get a little bit closer to when things roll out, to know how far consumers will be able to go. I think there's going to be variation across states. In some places, I think you can actually do the transaction. But what will be a little bit of a complicating factor, of course, is that people who qualify for subsidies, that information is going to have to be collected and vetted to determine how much subsidy they're going to get for their premiums. And so that will require some additional assistance.
Which leads me to the other question, is how much is it going to cost us as a state just to run the exchange? I mean, I thought, lordy, we're going to have staff people out the wazoo for this.
So if you look at, Massachusetts is our really best example.
That's true.
And they've actually been able to run things in a fairly lean way. I think that there is a lot of startup, and particularly as we think about the Medicaid expansion and our existing public insurance programs, we need to make sure that it's pretty smooth in terms of going across different types of coverage, because there will be a segment of the population that's going to have income fluctuations that might be eligible for Medicaid, but then their income might go up and they might transition into private insurance, but heavily subsidized. And we need to make sure that the systems work so that we can get people into the right insurance given their situation.
You know, you're making me more nervous.
I'm sorry.
Is it, because what you said is so true, is that somebody will be unemployed or they'll be employed, and then all the givens will be changed.
They will. So I think that we're in kind of new territory in terms of thinking about the dynamic nature of insurance and the transitions that people have. And so there's so much work being done right now at the state to try to think through these issues to make sure they're as consumer friendly as possible.
And now I was saying about the non-tech savvy person. Obviously, this can't just be on the website. There's got to be a way for people who don't have computer access.
There will be other resources available, I'm sure, that will help people in the community to be able to make these choices and to get enrolled in coverage.
Now, would this be, will it be, I always think that even people who are applying for public assistance of some kind, it's really difficult to do that. Will there be some sort of, can you go to a place in your county office and get some help if you can't figure this out?
I imagine that those resources will be available. I don't know that for sure. But I do think one thing to mention is that with the federal reform, particularly for the Medicaid program, the rules that govern eligibility are going to be standardized across the country for those states that choose to expand coverage, and things are going to be a little bit different. It's based on income, but there's no asset test anymore, and just the way that they're going to review people for eligibility will be simplified relative to what it is today.
And that'll make it better for everybody.
We hope so.
Well, then, and now we pass on to the other question, is that it's been much in the news here in Minnesota. We were heroes because we had a bipartisan health plan, Minnesota Care, which I think other people envied us for having this. But now the question is, what's going to happen to MinCare?
So Minnesota is in a unique position, along with a few other states in the country that have really been at the forefront of expanding coverage to lower income populations that don't fall under existing programs like Medicaid. These programs, the lawmakers in Minnesota are having to think through what's the best strategy. How do you integrate? Do you replace Minnesota Care with, do you take that population and move them into exchanges, or do you create some sort of alternative that will guarantee this population better coverage, or a different type of coverage, maybe something that's even more consistent with what they have now? Those are decisions that are going to have to be made by state policymakers.
Because it sounded to me, from what I had read in the newspaper, that MinCare actually probably would be a better bet for people than the new federal plan.
Right. I mean, so in the exchanges, the actuarial value or the generosity of the coverage will vary, and the subsidies are going to be targeted to a plan that is probably less generous than Minnesota Care.
So less generous, in other words, you'll get less coverage, so to speak.
Yeah.
But if it's more generous, then probably the state or we would pay more in taxes. I mean, I
think it's administratively complicated, but it's also for the people who know Minnesota Care best, thinking about what's the best strategy for this population in particular. One thing I do want to mention for individuals and families that make less than 250% of poverty, if they get exchange coverage, they will not only get premium assistance credits, but they will also get cost-sharing credits. So they're not going to pay as much out of pocket as other higher-income individuals would. So it is important to remember that the differences may not be that significant for that group, but again, I think administratively they have to think about what's best for that population and the state going forward.
Well, I guess the thing that we really haven't, it's hard to calculate, is when this is implemented, will there be less use of emergency rooms? Will there be less use of people, going to the more high-cost kind of health care that they get because they don't have a health insurance plan?
I think that the hope is that you will have expanded coverage to hundreds of thousands of individuals in Minnesota and millions nationally, that once you give people better financial access to care, that they will be able to access the system, including obtaining a regular provider or being able to get better continuity of care.
Now, I know when we first started talking about this and people said, young, healthy people are always the ones who say, well, I don't need insurance because I'm healthy.
Sure.
But then somebody said the penalty is just so small that for some people, well, it's cheaper for me to just go with the penalty than it is to get insurance. Is that still the case?
So in 2016, the penalty for a single person will be $695 or the larger $695 or 2.5% of income. It's not large relative to what a full price insurance premium might be. The trade-off, though, is that if that person gets sick, they're going to be footing the whole bill. I think that was a genuine criticism of the law in designing the penalty not to be that stiff. However, of course, there's pushback politically if you make it too stringent.
Now, what is going to happen in those states? I mean, there are going to be some states where people, for whatever reason, governors are going to say, this is not going to work for my state. Are people going to, cross over the border? I mean, are they going to go to a place where if they don't have any reason to stay in state A, will they go to state B?
That's a great question, and we've debated that in the hallways of the university. We can look at examples of states that have expanded Medicaid to parents or some childless adults. We haven't seen a lot of evidence of migration. It's not clear what might happen. We're looking at a different population that's going to have coverage expanded to them. And so to the extent that a neighboring state chooses to do nothing versus the other state, you never know. But I'm sure there will be requirements about residency that will try to mitigate some of that.
Well, because it was always the case that, the theoretical welfare mother from Chicago came to Minnesota because we had better benefits, and I would assume that they'll trot out that same argument again.
I'm sure that's a great research question somebody will be investigating
One
in
of your
about
grad students will be doing a thesis on that.
Probably.
When we look at this, there's been a lot of publicity, but are people really ready? I mean, have we done a good enough job of preparing the public for what's going to happen and the change and what's in the future?
So I think that's a great question. I think that probably not. I mean, this is a complex piece of legislation, and even just trying to explain the parts about insurance, let alone all of the other changes that are included in the law, it's a big task. And I think that education outreach is going to be so critical. And I know that folks in the state who are working to get the exchanges up and running, I know that they have put up a website now and they're doing lots of presentations, but it's going to be critically important that there be education materials out there, that there be individuals out there that can provide counsel, particularly as we get to fall when open enrollment begins in exchanges, and these questions really kind of surface as kind of to the top of the list.
It's October 1st is the time, right, when the enrollment can start?
Yes. So October 1st is the initial date when people can start to enroll in coverage through the exchanges, individuals and small employer groups, with that coverage beginning January 1st, 2014.
Now, so this is a question that probably other people had. Okay, so I have insurance now. Do I have to enroll? Do I have to do anything? So that probably would be many people's first question.
So it's going to depend on what kind of insurance you have, right? So if you have employer-sponsored insurance, you pretty much can continue doing what you do so long as your employer continues to offer insurance. Employers will have some additional requirements around disclosure that they need to do, providing employees with information about their benefits. There were also, of course, some early changes that happened in 2010 and 2011 around coverage. But in terms of individuals, they're going to have a new set of choices. They're going to be able to go to the exchange. People, particularly who don't have insurance, who may be sitting out of the market because they don't consider it to be affordable. People are going to need to be active and really explore what their options are, and to really see if they're going to be eligible for some additional help.
And I guess that's where I would say I'm wondering if we're really doing a good job on that part of it. I mean, to tell people that maybe for the first time in your life you can actually have health insurance
and a choice of plans. I think that's going to be really important. And I think it's going to be really important for individuals to be active consumers, and it's going to be important for state government and other types of community outreach to be there and helping individuals
because it
decisions.
is true then that people just probably don't have a clue about what this is all about.
It's new, right? The exchange is going to be new. The plans that are going to be available in it, some will be familiar, some won't. Some might be new as well, and it's going to be really a whole new world in terms of the new rules of the game, and people will have more choices, and people need to understand what is in it for them, what is available to them as far as extra help.
Now, is it going to require, here in Minnesota, a bipartisan effort to figure out what we're going to do as far as transitioning MinCare to something else?
So I don't know. I can't speak to that precisely, but I do know that those decisions are going to have to come very soon.
And they can't wait around because October 1st, everything has to be ready to roll.
Pretty much. You've got to be able to sign. They're going to be signing people up. So, right now they're working on getting plans, I think, certified, beginning that process, and really getting the infrastructure finalized to be able to handle the thousands of people who are going to be able to shop.
So that is a warning to you. October 1st is the magic day when you can start enrolling if you don't have health insurance now. And hopefully we've answered some of your questions. Now, as I said, there are a couple of websites that we're going to put up at the end of the show so that you can get more information. And one of them is about the exchanges, because that seems to me to be the most important and complicated. Well, let's say thanks to our guest, Jean Abraham from the University of Minnesota School of Public Health. You've done a great job of answering some of the questions.
Thank you.
And this is Joan Higginbotham for the League of Women Voters saying thanks for tuning in to We the People. We hope you'll join us again.